Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones. We are back here today to preview Purdue's homecoming game on Saturday against the Owls of Florida Atlantic. We'll take a look at FAU and what to expect under the lights on Saturday, talk the weekly injury report, give you 3 keys for a Boilermaker victory, and provide my prediction on Saturday night's game. Then you guys more than delivered with some great questions for the Q&A portion. Thank you to those of you who sent them in on Twitter. I'd like to make this a weekly part of the in-week preview podcast that we do. We'll do the Sunday night, Sunday afternoon, whenever, recaps of Saturday's game, and then a midweek show previewing the next opponent. And I'd like to make the Q&A a permanent part of that midweek show. So with good questions like you guys delivered with this week, it'll be easy from here on out. Should be a good one today. Looking forward to this. So let's get going here. If you don't already, though, follow the show on Twitter, @BoilersBeyond. That's where we'll be for those Q&As. Just tweet those over. DM them to me. DMs are always open, and we'll get them answered on the show for you. Really enjoy the engagement with you guys over there. And then subscribe. Wherever you get your podcasts, we are available anywhere. So be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss an episode 2 times a week during football. Haven't decided what we'll do during basketball yet, but we'll be coming at you plenty frequently until the end of basketball season. But it's all football for right now. Purdue and Florida Atlantic. Saturday, under the lights, a 7:30 kickoff on BTN. Purdue favored around 18 or 19 points. Wherever you shop around for lines may have it, a point, half a point off from there. But that's where they're sitting at, 18, 19-point favorites. The over-under is set at 61.5. The Owls come in out of the Conference USA. That's a conference that progressively keeps getting a little bit weaker. You hear about the Sun Belt that's been in the news so much early on this season with Appalachian State, with Coastal Carolina, with Marshall. They have really built that conference by taking some of the more passionate programs out of the Conference USA. This will be the first time Purdue has played an opponent from the Conference USA since 2015. That was the infamous season opener at Marshall, where if you had any doubts about the direction of the program, the first play from scrimmage showed you what was going on. I'll stop there. This will be the 6th non-Power 5 opponent for Jeff Brom during his tenure at Purdue. He is 3-2 in those games. Wins coming against Ohio, coming against UConn, coming against Indiana State a couple weeks ago, and the losses to Eastern Michigan and Nevada. Preseason, the Owls were projected to come in about middle of the pack of the Conference USA. I believe Athlon had them coming in at 6-6. They do their record predictions. So they were projected to be a middle of the pack team. It's an interesting program, Florida Atlantic is, because they're only in their 21st season of football. They began back in 2001. Jeff Brom's college coach from Louisville, the legendary Howard Schnellenberger, went down there to start that program up after he got done at Louisville. Thus far, the Owls are 2-2 on the young season. They got a big win in week 0, dominating Charlotte, and they also took down FCS Southeastern Louisiana. On the flip side, sandwiched in between those wins was a loss at Ohio, getting up in Matt country and falling to the Bobcats in a shootout. And then last week, they lost 40-14 on their home turf against Gus Malzahn and UCF. So they come in at 2-2, led by head coach Willie Taggart. What an interesting last decade or so for him, Had a little bit of success at Oregon, and then jumped to Florida State, and it was his second year he got fired there, I think. and landed on his feet at FAU. As I said, it's an interesting program. It is a roster that is constructed about exactly how you would expect for a South Florida roster to be constructed. No, they're not the biggest. They're not going to be, Iowa or Wisconsin with those big, bruising offensive lines and front sevens on defense, but they've got speed. For a group of 5 program, they certainly have speed. That's what comes out of South Florida, and they have plenty of it. Because of that, they like to run the ball. And they have a nice little duo at running back between Larry McCammon III and Zabari Mosley. They're going to take the bulk of the carries for them. Both those guys off to really good starts to the season. McCammon's coming in at over 7 yards per carry. Very impressive numbers there for him. This offense, though, they are very, very run first. They will seek to establish themselves on the ground. They're coming in 220 yards per game on the ground. Now, you kind of have to be careful with some of these yards per game numbers so early on in the season because level of competition is different, and especially when you are comparing the group of 5 to a Power 5. This will be the first Power 5 opponent that FAU has played all year. Sorry, UCF, you're not there yet. They got their 2 wins against Charlotte, who is one of the worst teams in the Power 5. They're really bad, and they knocked out Charlotte's quarterback early on in that game. And then Southeastern Louisiana, FCS program, I can't tell you I know anything about them, but I think it was 42-9. It was a blowout. Florida Atlantic killed them. They do, though, they like to run the ball, but they've got a 6th-year quarterback of their own in N'Kosi Perry. If the name sounds familiar, it probably should if you follow national college football pretty closely. Former Miami Hurricanes quarterback, started there in parts of 2018, 2019, and 2020 for the Canes. Now he's in his 2nd year and his final year at FAU. 6th-year guy, as I said. A lot of experience in his career. Off to a pretty nice start this year. Just shy of 1,000 yards through 4 games. 10 touchdowns to 2 picks. Nice ratio there. But he's completing just 57% of his passes. He's a threat to run, sure. He's not the scrambler, though, that Purdue saw last week in Garrett Schrader from Syracuse. Not quite as dynamic there, although he probably is a little bit better of a true passer than what we saw in Schrader a week ago. They have a few nice receivers, nothing that is really going to jump off the page for you, but, again, South Florida speed. They're going to be there. They're going to try to beat you over the top, and they're going to try to run, east and west to use that speed and get by you. Use that agility and get by you. For a group of 5 program, offensive line is fairly experienced, but again, always relative. On defense, they're definitely not very great. Allowing 41 points to Ohio, certainly not ideal. That was a 41-38 loss. Last week, they did hang in there with UCF for a little while, but that's a one-dimensional offense where the quarterback, John Rice Plumlee, the old Ole Miss guy, he threw for 300 yards, and he's not a passer. Louisville embarrassed him a couple weeks ago on Friday night, so that wasn't a good performance. 600 total yards of offense for UCF last week. On the season, FAU's allowing 270 pass yards a game. Vulnerable pass defense there. I did read where they're not the best tackling group in the back end. That's certainly something that Purdue should be able to exploit in the pass game. And again, you look at that 270 number, that's even helped by, again, knocking out Charlotte's starting quarterback early and then doing what they did to Southeastern Louisiana. Only 5 turnovers forced, 2 picks and 3 fumbles for them. not that big in the back end at all. And, even up front, their big defensive tackle, 330 pounds, he's not likely to play. So, certainly not what Purdue saw in Penn State. Probably more similar to Syracuse, but probably still a little bit smaller. Purdue should be able to do some nice things there against that defense. Looking at Purdue's injury report coming in, not a whole lot of clarity yet. Jeff Brom on his radio show tonight really didn't talk too much about the injury situation. Not that Tim Newton really probed either. Doesn't sound like Jalen Graham's going to play, though. With the original timetable they put on him, it sounded like the goal was to get him back for Minnesota next week. So, third game without Jalen Graham. Look, I just wouldn't plan on Brock Thompson. Brom said he was doubtful in his Monday press conference. It's unfortunate. You don't like to see that, especially for a guy who, it's not basketball, but he had his one shining moment in the bowl game last year. And you would have loved to see him be able to build on that and really put together a complete season. But at this point, the injuries are really slowing him down. And you hope he can get healthy, but I wouldn't plan on him again. That'll be the third straight game without Brock Thompson. Did sound like Samisi Fakasieki might be able to go this week. He dressed last week, didn't play. King Doru, I don't know. Maybe he's more likely than he was last week. But, again, I think Purdue's main goal here is to get guys to Minnesota. This is a game where, in theory, you could sneak something, get guys rested up and still pull out a win and get healthy for that game at Minnesota. No word on Abdur-Rahman Yassin, a guy who everyone wants to see. We saw glimpses of him, but we have not seen him yet this season. That's all I really can think of for injuries right now. T. Denson doesn't sound like anytime soon. Elijah Canyon, really no word, but it sounded like that was a need, not great. So that's what Purdue's working with there. 3 keys in this one. Number 1, and it probably goes without saying, but we're going to put it here anyways. Time to take a business approach here. The penalties last week, we talked plenty about it after the Syracuse game. Unacceptable. The trash talking, the brashness, that's never been Purdue's identity, and I think it needs to go. You need to show up to play. Purdue hasn't gotten off to great starts in a couple of games. Would like to get that out and get off to a better start on offense. Be the better team from the get-go. From the opening kick, Purdue needs to show that they're the better team, because they are. It's a Power 5 versus Group of 5 situation, and it's not a great Group of 5 team. Purdue needs to come out and be the better team. Can they change their, not so great starts? Of course they can. But it's about getting out there and doing it and getting last week out of there completely. Number 2, spread the wealth. Aiden O'Connell through 3 games has been very strong. The Penn State performance was not his best, but back-to-back really good performances for him, albeit the pick 6 last week. Charlie Jones, though, is the only pass catcher who has really been a big part of all 3 performances. It's time to see if someone else can step up, because when you look at this group of pass catchers, you have Jones and you have Payne Durham. You know what you have in those guys, but you have to keep them healthy. And keeping Payne Durham healthy is much easier said than done. Going to be really important to have them for the month of October. Ideally, you'd like to limit the number of big hits they take on Saturday. You'd like to lessen the need for their ice bath after the game. Let's see if you can get some other guys involved. Saw some nice things from Deion Burks. Saw some nice things from TJ Sheffield. Mershawn Rice was good against Penn State. Tyrone Tracy, waiting for him to really break out a little bit. But you would like to see these guys get out there and produce a little bit to maybe have a number 3 option behind Jones and Durham. Maybe someone can even be a true number 2 receiver. I don't know, but you would like to make sure those guys stay healthy and not have them take every single hit throughout the game. Finally, number 3 with the defense, just make N'Kosi Perry throw the ball. He's never been a great quarterback. Going back to what he did at Miami, he wasn't all that great. Just make him throw the ball. Make him drop back and throw the ball downfield. It should have won you the game against Syracuse last week when you executed there. If you do that, it's going to win you this game. I am very confident. FAU wants to run the ball, get them off that script, force them into 3rd and medium, 3rd and long, where they have to put the ball up in the air. Purdue's maybe overdue for a little bit of turnover luck. They can pick off a pass or two. Just don't commit so many pass interference and holding penalties. My goodness, that's been a mess. Purdue can do that. They do those 3. They win this one going away. You'll have a cover, and I think Purdue will do it. I'm going to go with 41-21. I think that execution and that focus is going to be good early on. I think this is going to be an opportunity for you to learn a lot about this Purdue team, because last week was ugly. Last week was a complete self-inflicted wound. It was the guy in 8 Mile that shoots himself in his leg. That's what Purdue did multiple times throughout that game on Saturday. It's time for them to put that behind them, move on, move forward. I think they do it. It should be a good crowd on Saturday. Looking at the ticket map, looks like it's going to be a strong turnout for homecoming. Still strange to me that it's a non-conference game for homecoming, but so be it. Brace yourselves. There are numbers on the side of the helmets. Going to drive me crazy. Just put the Purdue Pete logo on both sides. We'll see what they wear with that, but regardless, it should be a good atmosphere and should be a good opportunity for Purdue to get a win, move out of the month of September, and move into a absolutely critical month for this season to be remotely what fans were dreaming of when we were previewing this a month ago in late August. As I said, thank you to everyone who sent in mailbag questions. We got a number of them here. A lot of great stuff. So let's jump in. Had our first one, Mackie Maniac sent in. Is the pace that Charlie Jones is currently on sustainable in Big Ten play? Can he get drafted in the spring? I mean, through 3 games, he's on pace for 128 receptions, 1,896 yards, and 20 touchdowns. So probably not sustainable, if we're being honest here. I know that's going to come as a shocker to all of you. I think he's going to put up some really big numbers. That just is a little bit too big to ask. Assuming he stays healthy, of course. I think certainly, over 1,000 yards is almost a lock at this point if he stays healthy, Can he flirt with 100 receptions? I think he can. But it's going to be the Big Ten. You're going to face better defenses. You're going to face defenses that are more familiar with what Purdue does. I think you're going to have to find someone else to really step up and help take the load off him once teams are both capable and know to really focus on him and make other guys beat you. And can he be drafted? Yeah, absolutely. I don't see why not. Now, I'm not good at all at projecting an undrafted free agent versus a third-day draft pick. I'm not good at that at all. That's certainly where he falls in. He's undersized, but, you never know. I don't see why it's completely worth ruling out, though. So, yeah, absolutely. And I did have a question about him, too. Should he be taken off special teams? And I think the answer is probably. I know he was the Big Ten, all Big Ten first-team returner last year, but you can't risk an injury to him on special teams. He's become too big a part of the offense. I didn't see this coming. I don't know that anyone saw this coming, but he is the only receiver you look at so far this season that's been really a game changer. And you have to have that in this offense. It is a must. So, yeah, I think, let him catch punt returns, sure, but you don't want him taking big hits. Reese Taylor had a nice punt return last week. I think Tyrone Tracy is capable of going back there too. I'd be curious to see if Purdue moves him out of that role or not. It's not really Jeff Brom's MO, but I think at some point he's just too valuable to the offense. Mackie Maniacs also came in. What is your level of concern with Mitchell Finneran at kicker? And I'm going to say not that high. I just think we know what he's capable of and what he's not as reliable with. He's a short-range guy. He has been very reliable when Purdue is in the red zone. That would translate to a 37-yarder or in. But as I said on the Syracuse postgame show, the staff has been very hesitant to send him out from 40-plus. I think he only has 3 attempts from 40-plus on his career. One of them came against Oregon State last year, and the other 2 came against Syracuse. So there was what? That would be a 14-game span in between 40-plus yard attempts. Yeah, we know what he's capable of. It could be worse. Look, there's nothing wrong with having a kicker that doesn't have, moonshots in him. If he's reliable, he's reliable. But he doesn't have that Carson Wiggs type of leg, if you want a Purdue deep cut there, that's really going to be a threat once you cross the 40 or 35 or anything like that. Interesting one here. Are these growing pains with several new assistants and defensive play caller, or is it something deeper and more problematic? So is Purdue experiencing growing pains right now, or is it time to, hit the panic button a little bit? I think it's a little early for that. Certainly, you're not off to the start you wanted to, but Purdue also was in those games. There was plenty of staff turnover after last season. I have continually said on this podcast and will continue to that the next step for Purdue is to really raise that assistant coach staff pool. I think that money needs to increase to maintain your top assistants. That's what really killed Joe Tiller, and that's what you can't afford to kill Jeff Brom. So I certainly think there's been a number of spots with turnover. Defensively, I think things were always going to be different without George Karlaftis, but I think the defense has been solid. They don't have the pass rush, but your best 2 pass rushers were gone. I don't care what the stat book says. DeMarcus Mitchell was your second best pass rusher. There were a number of reasons why he didn't, put up crazy numbers last year, but he was really good. So they're not getting pressure, but they're doing a pretty good job despite not getting a ton of pressure. Kydron Jenkins, Scotty Humpick have been solid, but I don't think Ron English has been a problem as the defensive play caller. Now, you can always go back and second guess playing pretty loose against Penn State in that last 2-minute drill drive, or, certainly going man coverage with Bryce Hampton put on an island against Syracuse, but the offense is probably asking the defense to do too much. I think Jamarcus Shepard was a really big loss at receivers coach, and that's one that I think is a big loss both on and off the field in terms of the recruiting trail. That's a real bummer. I don't know that there's much to say negatively about Garrick McGee, but you are still waiting on some of those receivers to make some big plays. But as a whole, look, it's not panic button time. I'm not sure how good this team is. I think in 3 weeks, we'll know a lot more. If you struggle this weekend, then yeah, it's time to worry. And then you have a couple of road tests where you'll find out quite a bit real quick. Same listener asked, would you plant a flag on last week's game where the season, momentum, and even program turns? And look, again, I'm kind of staying in the same boat here where I don't think it's time to really hit the panic button. I think that's premature. As far as momentum goes, yeah, momentum's very important. And we saw what happened to Purdue in 2019 when they really built up some good momentum in 17 and 18. And then, 2019, they kind of fell on their face for a number of reasons. They had injuries to their top two players on both sides of the ball by October. They had to have countless freshmen in there before they were ready. But it's too early to go there with this group. Purdue's had missed opportunities, no doubt. And I think the Penn State one is the one that really eats at you in the big picture because that was a nationally televised game in prime time on a Thursday night. It was timed on it, maybe intentionally, maybe unintentionally, to where that West Virginia Pitt backyard brawl was over. So Purdue was really the only big game on TV. So, yeah, that would have been a big momentum win. Obviously, Syracuse is just a bummer because that game was so winnable. Purdue had no business losing it, even though the way they played, they really deserved to lose. Time will tell on this. At the end of the season, if it's really disappointing, yeah, I think, we may look back on the Syracuse game and say that was the turning point right there. But it's far too early to say that, especially with how many big games Purdue has coming up. What needs to be done to create some type of run game? Big question. Obviously, Purdue did not run the ball all that well against Syracuse, and, really this is the fourth season now in a row where Purdue has not run the ball all that well. It's complicated. It's certainly not an easy fix. I don't think that Purdue has the best offensive line when it comes to run blocking. I think it's definitely a better pass blocking group than it is a run blocking group, and that's two different types of blocking. That's very different. I don't think it's ideal to have two walk-ons in your top three in the depth chart at running back. And again, that's not to say that walk-ons can't be successful, because they're certainly proving that to be false. But, you've had some recruiting go poorly at running back. No fault of the staff sometimes. Things happen, but it just hasn't always gone well. I do think in this spread out type of offense, it would probably, at least I would like to see what a more mobile quarterback could do. And Purdue really, they haven't had a mobile quarterback under Jeff Brom. Elijah Sindelar and Aiden O'Connell, most certainly not. David Blau, Jack Plummer, not really. So we've never seen what the offense can do with a quarterback who's a little more mobile. Michael Lamo, I think, maybe has that a little bit. Brady Allen, not as much. Look, you got to get good quarterbacks, and you got to be able to throw the ball. That's the number one key in this offense. But I do think in this type of an offense, having a quarterback that's at least a threat, to tuck the ball and run for, a first down on 3rd and 4, or someone who you can incorporate a little bit of zone read with. I think that would be really big in helping this run game with a group of running backs that, is hard-nosed, and they aren't awful. They're not bad, but as a whole, this run game just isn't all that great. On the flip side, how about the run defense? Someone asked, is it the real deal? Again, so far so good. Last week was really big because you dealt with, a legitimate dual threat quarterback. I thought they did pretty well on him. Certainly he had some plays, but Purdue did fantastic on Sean Tucker, and that was something that was great to see. You'll face another team that likes to run the ball a lot this weekend, and that says absolutely nothing about what you'll see in Minneapolis in 2 weeks, a team that will run the ball as much as they possibly can. So we'll find out more, but so far so good from this run defense. Really a nice job for Purdue so far in that aspect. What is the single biggest issue for Purdue through 3 games? Mackie Maniac says that theirs is coaching, despite them being a fan of Jeff Brom. Number of ways you can go with this, but I'm going to go with penalties. And if you think that coaching falls back on that, or that falls back on coaching, then I don't think that's completely unfair, but I do think there's more to it than that. You know, Purdue averaged like 4.5 penalties a game last year, but when you look at their 2 losses, they've had 9 and 13, so an average of 11. That's not a winning formula. Purdue is not that talented to overcome that. Jeff Brom was interesting talking about the pass coverage penalties too. And he referenced that, you know, they've had a lot of pass interference and holding calls from the secondary, and that they may need to look at the way they're coaching that. I think that is a little bit worrisome when it comes to penalties and, you know, when it comes to coaching as well, but I don't know if there are rule changes with any of that and the way it's being enforced or not. But certainly, you know, that's a problem. I think when you do look at coaching, yes, you know, the play calling at the end of Penn State as it relates to the run-pass split, the defensive play call with Bryce Hampton getting beat to the corner, yeah, you know, those can be questioned, no doubt. But when you look back on it, Penn State might be really solid. They just went to Auburn and drilled them. Not that Auburn's any good, but they went down to SEC country and won by about 30. Certainly a bad loss last week for Purdue. I don't think Syracuse is that great. Leadership was lacking all around. The players, the coaches, all around. But I do think, you know, you clean up those penalties, especially in the back end on those pass interferences and holdings, you're probably looking at 3-0 if that's not an issue. Is the Big Ten West still the goal? How do I feel about the odds of that? I think the West is still the goal, but I do think, realistically, a loss at Minnesota next week would probably make that a pipe dream at best. I would put Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Purdue as the top 3 contenders right now in the Big Ten West. And you're looking at a very real situation here. This weekend, Minnesota is very short favorites on the road at Michigan State. Wisconsin is big-time dogs in the horseshoe against Ohio State. It's very reasonable to think that we enter October with all 3 of those programs having a Big Ten loss coming from the East Division. If you're Purdue, you're rooting like hell for Michigan State and Ohio State this weekend to help you in that race. I think at bare minimum, you need to split Minnesota and Wisconsin. We know what's happened at Wisconsin in the past. As far as Minnesota goes, more to come on that next week. Also, I had a question here from Miles. Has Brom lost his touch commanding discipline? We'll find out moving forward. You know, I don't think he's lost the locker room or anything. And I don't think this is some renegade program. I don't know that discipline has necessarily been a strength or weakness of this team under Jeff Brom. I don't know that it's really been a defining factor either way. There have certainly been undisciplined moments. You look back to early in 2018, Lorenzo Neal against Northwestern and Cornell Jones against Eastern Michigan. 2 penalties that cost you wins early on, or at least a chance to beat Northwestern. So It's been an issue before. I don't think it's an issue that Jeff Brom has lost the guys, but no doubt Syracuse was a low point when it comes to player discipline and team discipline. Last question here, everyone's favorite topic. Louisville and Purdue are both sitting at 1-2. Have the Brom to Louisville talks ever been this hot? My answer is yes. When the Louisville job was vacant at the end of 2018 and they were very aggressively going after Jeff Brom, I would certainly say that at that point, the talks were definitely hotter, but, it is what it is. Right now, I think that at the end of the day, all you can really do if you're Purdue is hope that Louisville keeps winning. They're frustrating as can be, if that's your perspective, because they do some very frustrating things on the field that I think certainly could lead to Scott Satterfield's dismissal, but time will tell there. We will see what goes on. I don't know how much hotter the speculation will be, though, until either the bottom falls out on their season or that job is officially open in November. That's all I have for you. Thank you for spending your time with me. And again, thank you for all of those great questions. We'll be back here Sunday, post-game reaction podcast from Florida Atlantic. We'll have plenty of thoughts from whatever happens on Saturday night at Ross-Ade Stadium. Then, mid-next week, we will get to the Golden Gophers. Be sure to follow on Twitter at BoilersBeyond and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. Safe travels for those of you coming into Greater Lafayette for homecoming weekend. Enjoy another great weekend of college football.